Hi everyone, welcome to part 2. The next section explores what Nimzowitsch described as the 5 special cases on the 7th rank. He begins with the absolute 7th rank and describes it as a situation where a rook on a 7th rank completely shuts in the opposing king, i.e. there are no pawns to hide behind, such as the predicament the white king finds himself in this position. Here though it's white to move, and he can create a winning endgame by utilizing the absolute 7th rank. If you want to try and spot how, then stop the video now. The first move isn't too tough. Queen takes h3 check. This forks the rook on e6 and thus forces rook h6, where white can now play Queen takes h6 check, and this produces a winning endgame thanks to the 7th rank absolute. After g takes h6, the rook is controlling completely this king, the same way that the black rook is. The difference is that white has a far advanced passed pawn, and Nimzowitsch stresses that such a combination almost always wins. The point is that there is nowhere for the black king to run in order to avoid being checked when the pawn queens, which wouldn't be the case if his h6 pawn was on g7. He could play king h7 and the position would be a draw. Play would continue b6, and if black tries, for example, rook b2, now comes simply b7 with rook a8 check and the queening of the pawn next move. And note that if black moves his king to the 7th rank, then white can queen and it will be check from the rook, which is equally decisive. Alternatively to rook b2, black could try rook d8, but now again b7 and rook a8 comes next. And there's nothing that black can do about that. Again, if he moves his king, then queening would check from the rook. If he doesn't move his king, then rook a8, and the rook has to exchange, and white gets a queen. Needless to say, in every line, it's hopelessly lost for black. This position is taken from a game between Tarrasch and Lasker, played in Berlin in 1918. In post-game analysis, Lasker demonstrated how to win after rook a2 check, which is with king g1, you know, if that is white plays king g1, because this move is a blunder, because now black is winning due to his combination of the absolute 7th rank. There's no way for the king to escape here, in combination with this passed a pawn. And play continues simply a5, rook takes g7. Black is not concerned with losing this pawn because he knows that this combination will win. So a4, rook g6, a3, rook takes f6. White even goes a pawn up, but it still doesn't matter. After rook b2, the pawn is going to queen, thanks to the tactics that we saw before. And if white's g-pawn was on g2 instead, then the king would be able to go to h2, and again it would be a draw, or white even might have winning chances. However, instead of king g1, white can try to neutralize black's control of the 7th rank by playing, instead of king g1, king e1. And now after a5 he can play king d1, a4, king c1, a3, king b1, and from here white can draw. And this is one of the rare instances where the absolute 7th rank and a passed pawn doesn't automatically win. The next special case that Nimzowitsch looked at is the one of the simple draw via perpetual check. It's white to move, and he's faced with mate if black is given a move simply with rook h1. So he's forced into drawing by a perpetual check. And if you want to have a look at the position and figure out the right way to do it, then stop the video now. Rook f e7 check is the correct move. Checking with the other rook will lose, which we'll see in a moment. The point is that this rook on d7 here is a good sentry, and it's holding the black king in the top 4 squares here. It's e8 to h8, and you know, from here play might continue. King f8, rook f7 check, king g8, rook g7 check, king h8, and rook h7 check. Oh, and it's important to note here that white just can't play rook g1 here, or he's losing after rook f2 check and forced mate. So rook h7 check, now king g8, now rook hg7 check, king h8, rook h7 check, king g8, etc. And white is fine as long as he keeps checking with this rook. But let's say he hasn't looked at the position closely and he tries instead rook dg7 check, believing he can force the draw with either rook. Well, now will come king f8, and suddenly the king can escape. Rook f7 check, king e8, rook e7 check, king d8. There's no rook on d7 now, so the black king is free to roam. King d7, king c8, rook c7, king b8, and now the bishop is covering the check on b7, and black will win from here easily. So the moral of the story is, in the words of Nimzowitsch, firstly that a change is not always as good as a rest, and secondly, the rook on d7 was an excellent guard and should not have been disturbed unnecessarily. The third special case is a drawing mechanism with a rook on the 7th rank used in conjunction with a knight. Black has 3 passed pawns here together, all 1 move away from queening, a remarkable position, and thus white is forced to take the draw if he can find it, or he's lost. If you'd like to try and find the correct approach, then please stop the video now. Rook d7 is the correct first move, and it's important to note how the rook is defended by the knight in this setup. Playing instead knight h7 check loses after king e8, knight f6 check, king d8, and white runs out of checks after rook d7 check, king c8, and he's losing in the long run after rook takes d2, c1 queen, rook takes e2, queen f4 check, king g2, queen takes f6. And the point in playing rook d7 instead of knight h7 check is that after black queens, only now can white play knight h7 check with a draw, king g8. If instead king e8, knight f6 check, and now we see the importance of the rook being on a square that the knight defends. This drives the king back to f8, and the checks can continue indefinitely. So knight h7 check, king g8, knight f6 check, king f8, etc. If instead king h8, rook h7 is mate. So that's how white secures the perpetual, and it is something that comes up occasionally, so it's a little trick worth knowing. And here's the exact same position except with a black rook on c8. Again, if you want to try and solve it, then please stop the video now. White has the same problems. He's faced with 3 queens coming in quick succession, but luckily he has the rook and the knight. And in this position, knight h7 check is now the first move, because this rook on c8 is preventing the king from escaping, as we saw in the first variation from the last example. This means that the rook on d7 is no longer necessary, as if the black king tries escaping that way, he'll get mated. If king e8, knight f6 check, and king f8. If instead king d8, then rook d7 is mate. And this means that the knight can continue his checks and the game can be drawn. After knight f6 check, he'll have to go back to f8, and then the checks can just continue indefinitely. And you know, the black king still can't hide in the corner, or he gets mated as before if he tries going to h8 instead. And incidentally, from the starting position, now if rook d7 is played, which was, you know, the winning move in the last example, it's now a loss after rook c6, and the knight will be hanging to the rook. For example, knight h7 check, king g8, knight f6 check, rook takes f6, and an easy win. So like I said, that's a useful little trick worth knowing. Okay, that's the end of part 2.